Today I am joined with the most prolific producer of film music that has over 1,400 albums under his name. He started his career in 1985, was with Varese Sarabande Records for over 30 years, has produced concerts around the world, including the first ever that was in China. Now has Robert Townsend Productions, where he's continuing his legacy of film music productions and concerts and albums. We at the Golden State Pops Orchestra were very honored to be able to pay tribute to the 35th anniversary of Varese Sarabande Records with Robert collaborating back in 2013. We got to work with them on every single concert that season, including a gala concert that had the most unbelievable, unprecedented list of A-list composers involved. It was amazing here in Los Angeles, and he continues concerts like that around the world. I'm honored and thrilled to be able to welcome, and please welcome with me, Robert Townsend. Hello, Robert.
Hello, Stephen. Thank you for that.
Thank you for joining.
Introduction. Yeah, cheers to you. And cheers. What a year that saga and series of shows we did in 2013 was.
Oh, I know. Sometimes when I look back at whether it's a program or a picture or, even those 4 or 5 minute recap videos that were made afterwards, I think about it and I'm like, that was epic. That was epic.
Genuine film music history. Absolutely genuine film music history. There have one of a kind evenings that everyone who was there and got to be part of it realized it was a magical experience available to just such a select few.
With the 1985 concert, to this day, one of the images that stands out in my mind, and it's not even the concert itself, which was phenomenal, but I remember walking outside after the rehearsal, and the Redondo Beach Performing Arts Center has kind of that modern look to it, the sleek metal on the outdoors, and that by the time I got out there, the DeLorean was sitting there. I remember going, wow, that looks really, really cool.
Yeah.
And then of course the Drew Struzan concert, which, still I remember, one person commented, I think it was Richard Kraft, that at that point that he said that was the best film music concert he had ever been to.
Yeah.
And it's like, and obviously the artwork of Drew Struzan just took that concert.
It was so special. Also, there was Richard's beautiful comment. You're right. That was Richard who said that. And then I remember Austin at the party afterwards, he said something to me in the direction of that he couldn't count and couldn't even remember, couldn't conceive of how many times he had heard Star Wars and Indiana Jones in concert. But we gave him the experience that night as though he was listening to them for the first time again, because it was such a unique presentation where it wasn't just about the music, but it also wasn't a clip from the film. It was you were seeing something that was so tied to your memories, the nostalgia of those movies, and the way you remember them. In those cases, in some cases, the way that we kind of envision the film for the first time, even before seeing the film, is seeing the movie posters.
Right.
And then to bring all of that back and then combine it with the music. Even Drew had no idea what was going to be happening that night and thought he was just going to be kind of a footnote to the whole thing. I remember at the rehearsal, he was saying to some of the composers, he said, "Oh, I think my art is just an excuse to put on a concert tonight." It's like, no, he had no idea the degree to which it was going to be all about him. And then with him being there and just the atmosphere, the magic in all the feelings in the room. I mean, have you ever had a concert where the first standing ovation came in the first 30 seconds of the show? All I had to do was introduce Drew and the audience was on their feet.
Right.
But there was one more component that had to be squeezed into that time frame, because after Drew finished speaking, and he was ready to leave the stage, I said, "Oh, one second, Drew. there's a very good friend of yours who wished he could be here.
That's right.
And wasn't able to. And I'm, and wanted to send a special message for you. And I motioned to the screen, and that's when we had the video from Steven Spielberg.
And the crowd responded to that, because it was like, oh my gosh, Steven Spielberg sent a video.
Yeah, it's like we already had Richard Donner earlier in the evening, and now here's Spielberg.
Oh, so before we get too far along into the current times, let's, we talked about the concert from 1985. Let's go back in time.
Yeah. Well, to 1985.
To 1985. Yeah, exactly. But even prior to 1985, I'm curious. You've had this lengthy career as I said earlier, most prolific producer of film music that's ever been in this industry. So when you were a child, when you were at home, what was there music in your household? Were you growing up with music? What was your exposure to music when you were a kid?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was to an extent, but not overtly or overly. I mean, my grandfather was an organist, and loved classical music and jazz as well. And my explorations into even his own record collection, if I remember correctly, I don't think that really started until after I had formulated my own interests by going to see Star Wars, and that being the initial introduction to this whole world. Because Star Wars, in 1977, when Star Wars opened, I had just turned 12. And it was this, magical time. These are, it's the ideal period, looking back even historically, what was going on in film music at the time for the ages that I was when that was happening. I had just turned 12 when Star Wars opened. I was 13 for Superman, 14 for Star Trek, the motion picture, and Alien. And because those were really the four scores that truly captured my interest and developed my passion and love for film music, and then kind of encouraged me to dive further into exploring other works by John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith, and also discovering other composers like Alex North and Elmer Bernstein and Bernard Herrmann and Korngold and et cetera, et cetera. And then the passion just turned voracious. And
so as a teenager, you're being exposed to these films that you're recognizing how great the music is in them, and it just keeps building and building. What was the point for you where suddenly you're like, I want to do something with this. I want to be involved in that.
Well, looking back, it's amazing how quickly that all happened. So this becomes my real introduction to the wonders of the sounds of a symphony orchestra. As I'm exploring other composers, and other works of Williams and Goldsmith, as I say, this voracious appetite, I'm wanting to, acquire other older scores of Jerry Goldsmith, like Logan's Run and The Great Train Robbery, and things he was doing around the time of Star Trek, or a little before. What he was writing, Masada and Outland, and then 1982, which was just phenomenal for Goldsmith with Poltergeist. 1981, The Final Conflict, the third Omen film. Also a little movie he scored called Raggedy Man, beautiful Sissy Spacek. And then also at that time, what's John Williams up to? Well, he's writing Raiders of the Lost Ark in 81, E.T. in 82, and between these two hugely famous scores, he scores a film called Heartbeats with Andy Kaufman and Bernadette Peters. And it's a movie about robots, and MCA had planned an album and canceled it because the movie was such a disaster. And so now the score that John wrote between these two famous scores of his doesn't even get released. Further, there's no album, even though Jerry won an Oscar for the first Omen, and then scored Damien Omen 2, and then the third film, The Final Conflict. By the time The Final Conflict came around and it wasn't successful, there was no album for that. Raggedy Man, small movie, beautiful film, beautiful score, but again, MCA planned an album, canceled it. I'm now becoming frustrated that some of the scores that I want to buy, I'm not able to. And, I remember, this is VHS, era, still, I think pretty kind of fresh in that world. And I remember, kind of putting a tape recorder up to the television to record themes off the crappy, television speaker. But that's the only way I could listen to these scores following their, seeing them theatrically, or, by like 83, 84, it was a terrible time for soundtracks. Elmer Bernstein, Bill Conti, they were scoring hugely successful movies, gigantic franchises like, Ghostbusters, Stripes, The Karate Kid. None of these had proper score album releases. So it was crazy that that these phenomenal scores, these great works by these great composers, all the great composers, there's so many of them, were still busy at this time. We still had Alex North and George Delarue, and I was discovering and falling in love with all of them at this time. By 85, I started thinking, okay, what if I just stop waiting for somebody else to put out these scores that I love and do it myself? Why can't I just do it myself? And, as a kid who doesn't know anything, what have I got to lose? Let's give it a shot. And so it was October of 85 that I actually registered and established my label in Canada, Masters Film Music, and then reached out to Varese Sarabande in Los Angeles, which certainly existed at that time. It had been around for a few years. Varese was founded in 78. And so I reached out to them to propose my idea, and spoke with Chris Kuchler, and then it was through Varese that they connected me with 20th Century Fox and Jerry Goldsmith. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing all of this over the phone from Canada, and anyone who I was talking to, I don't know that they really had a clear picture of how young I was. And here I am, talking to Jerry Goldsmith and talking to 20th Century Fox, and I do the first album and put the entirety of the Final Conflict project together, which then ultimately gets released. So much excitement over just the very existence of it, but then compounding that, the aspect of, and it's so wonderful. They're hearing this score that is one of, to this day, you look over Goldsmith's entire career, it's considered one of his very best scores.
And I think for you're talking about the, being naive as a 19-year-old and not really knowing what you're not supposed to do and just jumping in head first. But what a great story for people to hear. You literally just decided, I'm going to start my own company. I'm going to make a couple phone calls and see what's possible. And at the end of it was this epic soundtrack with one of the best film composers ever, with one of his best scores ever. You were filling a void. You felt that there was a void out there of a lack of film releases. So this is your first album, and obviously there's a lot of springboard things that come from that as far as relationships with Jerry Goldsmith and the beginning of a career. But when and what led you to then moving? Because this was all happening while you were in Canada. So what happened to bring you to Los Angeles eventually?
Only a fewer years in transition between starting Masters Film Music in 1985 and then coming to Los Angeles in 89. Elapsing through that period, I did another project with Goldsmith, a movie called Lionheart, put together a re-recording project with George Delarue, because actually my very first recording session of all time was with George Delarue recording Agnes of God with the Toronto Symphony in 1985. So I had the connection with him, and then put together a re-recording project that became a series of recordings called Georges Delerue, the London Sessions, recorded at Abbey Road in London with an amazing, London orchestra, with Georges conducting special suites of some of his greatest scores. And I remember too, a very special piece on that album was that I came up with the idea of, I knew Georges was a wonderful pianist, and there were few recordings of him playing the piano. So I brought up that I wanted to have something on the album that featured him as the pianist. Mm. And so I put that out there. Again, we're going back to, I'm like, 20 years old at the time, but I pitched that to Delerue, and then he comes back with the concept and says, I think for the piano piece, I will do a piece for piano and orchestra, a suite called Homage of Truffaut, and creates a 10 to 12, I forgot how long it is, 10 to 12 minute, I think it's 12 minutes, an orchestral suite for piano and orchestra with music from all 10 of his scores for Francois Truffaut. With Georges on piano, it's like, oh my God. I mean, it's just an extraordinary piece. And then we also recorded his, a beautiful suite from his unused score for Something Wicked This Way Comes. And then so many of the American films he had done around that time, from, Rich and Famous and Steel Magnolias, and the melodies from that man, just beyond words. It's just an endless river of melodic gold from him. So I had that going on, and then some special issues of Bernard Herrmann music, a box set of Bernard Herrmann the concert suites, which were concert versions of some of his greatest scores from Citizen Kane and Vertigo and Psycho and The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and all of these masterpieces that he had recorded with the National Philharmonic Orchestra and the London Philharmonic Orchestra in London. And then also a really amazing, the penultimate score of Herrmann's called Obsession, Brian De Palma film. So I did special releases on a wholly Masters Film Music label. So I had kind of the series, it was a Masters Film Music label on Varese Sarabande, but then there was a completely independent Masters Film Music series of recordings that I did. And that included these Herrmann releases. Also, I did, at the same time, John Williams's The Reavers' first CD release of that score. Bob Peak art on many of these titles as well, by the way. What became the formation of the entire limited edition market of film music releases that became so dominant in the coming years was in answer to the release of Jerry's Lionheart score that I produced as a 2-volume series of recordings, but then the movie did nothing. I mean, it almost didn't come out at all. But Jerry's score, beyond words. I mean, Jerry's score, an absolute masterpiece. Yeah. But that started, I'm always kind of looking for kind of, new approaches and fresh approaches, and how to, if there's a problem, how do you solve the problem? So I put some thought into that, and it was like, okay, well, so the people that want this score are people who love film music and have a passion for film music, and people who love Jerry Goldsmith and have a passion for his music. So that became the impetus of my creating a series that became the Varese Sarabande CD Club. But the first releases of the Varese Sarabande CD Club were Masters Film Music titles. Were a trio of Masters Film Music titles, and it was The Boys from Brazil, the first CD release of that score, a Roy Budd score for a movie called The Wild Geese, and then an album of, I was back with Jerry again, an album called Jerry Goldsmith Suites and Themes, which was a studio recording of his concert program circa 1988, with Jerry conducting the Philharmonia Orchestra, and recorded in London. And so that was a Masters Film Music release, and Bob Peake did that amazing painting of Jerry for the cover. And which, a little interesting side note behind that painting too, because it's the setting of the painting with the chandelier and the orchestra, that's actually the Toronto Symphony in Roy Thomson Hall, because my first concert production very nearly, not predated, but almost coincided with the very beginning of my career as an album producer, because there was a charity organization in Toronto that was looking to have a fundraiser event, and somehow had connected with me, and the idea was that I would bring Jerry Goldsmith and present Goldsmith in concert with the Toronto Symphony as a fundraiser for this this organization in 1988.
Okay.
And but then what happened was it was a, I think, partially government funded charity, and they had their funding cut, and so kind of at the last minute, it just wasn't possible to proceed with the concert.
Can we assume then that with all of this happening between when you did that first album in '85 and you eventually moved to LA in '89, can we just assume that in that short span of time, there must have just been a point where you just thought, I probably need to be in Los Angeles to keep doing what I'm doing? Or was there something else that led to the move?
Yeah, largely it was that, and then there was also the side of the story where it was after I had already done The Final Conflict with Varese, but early in the stage of doing the movie Lionheart, that's when Richard Kraft started at Varese. And so Richard became the film music producer there. And so it was while Richard was kind of representing me essentially in Los Angeles during the Lionheart production. I mean, that's when we became kind of great friends, just, over the phone. And then I actually came to Los Angeles in 1987, just to, be down here and actually, do some of the work on the album and visit with Richard and visit with, Chris Kuchler and the whole, and go to Varese, the offices for the first time and all of that. Richard and I became good friends. He had been an agent and then came to being a film music agent, came to Varese, became a film music producer, which only lasted a couple years because then another opportunity opened up for him to return to being a film music agent, which he felt was his calling. He was right. So he found his calling and I found mine.
Thank you for watching. For more great videos, subscribe to the Maestro Fox YouTube channel. To learn more about the Maestro, visit StevenAllenFox.com.